We're good. Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. It's always weird to hold this microphone and have it not amplify your voice. I'm going to do a very, very brief introduction. Welcome to you all. I'm so glad that we convinced Ivano and Amanda to give a talk today. I think that the battery fire was a very challenging time for a lot of us, and it's a tragedy. We wish that it hadn't happened. But I think that the aftermath and the work that's been done here is a really, really amazing example of why marine labs are so important. And I think it's a really great example of the uniqueness of this marine lab, and that we have so many folks with such a variety of expertise who really collaborate well and work well together. And within a matter of days, basically is probably before they wanted you to be out there. Ivano was out there measuring stuff, and other people were out there collecting stuff. And so I'm really thrilled that they've reached the point where the first paper has come out. I'm sure that you all saw that, and we're excited to hear it. And they're going to wing it a little bit because Ivano has an interview, and Amanda was interviewed earlier today, and so they have to come and go with the media.
Yeah, all right. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Petra. And all right, so as Petra said, I'm going to be here for the first 10 minutes, and then I have to go, but I might come back. So stay tuned. So Amanda is going to. So
Please
this
come
is
back.
Was that?
Please come back.
No, you're fine. So this is not, by all means, not. We just put together a slideshow together. So just and what we like to do also to leave time for a conversation. So what I'm going to do right now is to share with you kind of the main highlight of the study and where we are at, and then we'll talk about the follow-up. And so this presentation was actually created for a completely different meeting, which is perfect, so I keep going. And first of all, well, you all know where we are, right? I don't have to convince you why Alconsul is important. That's great, so let's keep that. But what is important to understand is how we live in a place where nature and human intervention are completely interconnected. So we call this a working landscape, which is really important because we do have a very, very pristine natural environment next to one of the most industrialized and agriculturally intense areas. So the two combines together. Also, as you know, much of the work that we've been doing here in Alconsul in the wetlands with our colleagues from Alconsul Research Reserve, as well as CCWG and many others, has been on restoration, restoring the slough, because much of the land over there has been drained and diked and subsided. So we lost a lot of marshes, and that was my introduction to show everyone the importance of our monitoring work and what we've been doing so far, and that's why we have baseline data before the fire. It was serendipity. We're just doing something completely different, and tells you really the importance of monitoring, which I'm trying to nail to all the news media, that we need money to keep measuring, our habitats. And this is why we went out on a marsh restoration project in the last 20 years, is because at the end of the 19th century, the slough was a very pristine environment with the majority of the area being covered by marshes, and then because of diking and draining, it turned into a stinky mud flat, as you know. That's really not a good picture, but so what we did is to add sediments, restore the tidal flow and add sediments to places that were sunk several feet below sea level to regrow some of the essential marsh habitats, such as the ones where the pickleweed grows and then the whole ecosystem follows. And this is our first area, which is a Hester Marsh. This is before 2012, and this is after the sediments were added. So we really created this landscaping to restore and recreate tidal flow and everything. So some of the work that I've been doing is to understand what happens to the sediments after we put them in place in terms of compaction, changes in physical properties, but also what is the best recipe to grow back healthy marshes, because we see a lot of patchiness in the growth. So one of the things I've been doing is to measure the composition of soils. And serendipity wants that in 2023, we did an extensive elemental mapping of soils, which included also metals, which turned out to be very important. Because, as you all know, in January 16, 2025, a fire abruptly occurred in the power plant, And you can see that, actually, this is a really cool picture that made it to the paper by Mark Takaki, which is really cool because you can see how the smoke plume traveled from the power plant, so the ocean is on that side, over Alcon Slough, and this is actually Esther Marsh right here. So a couple of kilometers away from the fire. And there are other pictures that clearly show how the cloud kind of came down and started doing all these convolutions. And what we found is that stuff fell from that smoke cloud there. This is the timeline of the events. The fire burned, as you all know, most of you were here for 4 days, and after a few days, the Department of Toxic Substance and Control, the EPA told us that the air quality was okay. We could come back to work, so we did, and I was curious about our survey area, so I went back the day after. We were able to come back here. Yeah, let's get to the. And there are other data about the power plant, the largest energy storage facility in the world, 1,200, 300 megawatts, 37,000 batteries were stored in one building. Thermal runaway, the whole thing just caught on fire. And as you know, the firefighters couldn't do anything. It's not standing, just wait for the whole thing to burn, part of it to burn, and the fire to extinguish itself. All right. We go back in the field, and that's what we see. Chunks of battery stuff, pieces of black soot all over the place, kilometers away from the site of the battery. And also our marine operations, if you remember, if you saw it, some of our boats were covered with soot. So, there was clear visual evidence of the battery fire. So something was happening, so I was curious, and I remeasured the soils in some of the transects that we have occupied over time, and that's, the map of Esther Marsh. And actually, this is me after the fire, not wearing any mask, any protective, anything, because our quality is good, right? I was like, and we were out there, there were tractors and dust, and yeah, well. So it turned out that when I started looking at the data that we were collecting, and I'll show you the figure that made it to the paper, is that it was clear that some elements were off the chart. And you see here 2 of them mapped, which is nickel and cobalt. And by the way, I knew very little about batteries 10 months ago. Very little. I mean, what I studied in school like you. So then I became quickly an expert, or so to speak. And what was really striking is that these 2 elements, not only they were just very high, and by the way, this is after the fire, this is before. So, you don't need a scientist to tell that, things have changed. There was a multifold increase of the 2, but also the 2 were clearly correlated after the fire. So they knew each other. They were coming from the same source. And actually, this is the figure that made it to the paper because of the distribution of concentration. Everything was logarithmically transformed. We did the right things, thanks to the reviewers. And what you see here is clearly, this is the before, this is the after, and this is the one-on-one correlation between the 2. So the pre-fire situation was showing that nickel and cobalt were much more than a 1-on-1 ratio, and I need to go. Post-fire was 2-to-1. So not only an increase in concentration, multifold increase both, so this 2-to-1 ratio, and also the smoking gun was that we took samples from the soil, went back to our scanning electron microscope, and the metals were there. So that was clearly evidence of the battery having released, the fire having released metal batteries, which actually look really cool, by the way. And those metal beads you see there are, 5 microns. I mean, this is the scale here. So we are looking at very, very tiny things, which eventually got projected in the atmosphere and carried away by the smoke plume. And as some of you know, we also have a microprobe that goes with the scanning electron microscope, so we can see and we can map out elements. And those spherules, those nanoparticles, which come sometimes in grapes-like things, probably they melted together during the fire, are clearly containing the 3 elements that we see increase in the soil. So, yeah. And now my esteemed colleague, Amanda Kahn, see you on TV in about 5 minutes.
Ivano's hopping on TV, so we're gonna, now that he'll come back and keep talking about the rest of those results. Yeah. So we're going to switch gears and jump ahead in the talk a little bit. So now you've seen there's evidence of, oh, you're right. I already have one on me. He handed it to me, so I took it. Okay, so now you've seen evidence of these materials, which look like they have manganese and cobalt and nickel on those particles. And so we're going to skip the part where spatially Ivano describes some of where they were found and how deep they were found. The quick summary that you need to know for the biological side is they were found on the surface of sediments, right? So there was deposition that came down and settled on the sediment surface. And so a team of us got together as part of the larger EMBER research team. Fun acronyms are required in science. And we tried to talk about how if material was deposited on the sediments in Elkhorn Slough, where might it end up next? And so for the biota team, the question was, could it be moving into food webs? And so we started, as you guys know, I mostly study sponges and filter feeders. Filter feeders are great filters, biological filters in the environment. So this all started with me saying, well, maybe we could filter water, but we could also just ask the filter feeders, measure from the filter feeders and see what they're naturally filtering. And then that grew to, well, are they eating it? Are they incorporating it? What species might matter? What about other feeding modes? And so I'm going to skip ahead to the right section of the talk. Give me just a moment. Ooh, show presenter view. Yes, please. That will help me go to the right section of the talk. Okay, so the biota team is a team that is tracking whether there's uptake or accumulation of metals related to the battery fire into plants, invertebrates, and fish in Elkhorn Slough. So we grew from just filter feeders. And so this is a multi-institution sort of collaboration here. So we've got folks from Elkhorn Slough, National Estuarine Research Reserve, the Amundsen Land Trust, Moss Landing Marine Labs, Monterey Bay Aquarium, and we also have Natalie from CSUMB. So I forgot to put the CSUMB logo on here. Sorry. But yeah, lots of folks involved. And basically batteries, the soot and the ash that can settle onto sediments, those metals could either dissolve into the water, which is something that Max Grand is studying, and Ivano has some slides that Max shared that we'll bring up later too. So they might dissolve from the sediments into the pore water or remain particle bound, and then those dissolved metals can then get taken up, say by filter feeders, filtering particles, by deposit feeders that might be snuffling along on the surface, eating material and ingesting metals from that, or they can be eaten by lower trophic levels and move up through food webs biologically. And so let's see. Oh, here's our team. Here are team members. That's me. And then we've got Kirstine Wasson at Elkhorn Slough, Wes, we've got Autumn, who's here in the crowd. Yay! Autumn does a ton of the lab coordination. We've got Natalie also in the crowd, I think I saw. And then Jacob, who is a former Moss Landing student, who is now the program manager for the Coastal and Ocean Stewardship Program with Amundsen Land Trust, and then a huge network of volunteers. Maybe some of you have seen my emails coming out saying, hey, we need volunteers for more sampling for the battery fire. So we have quite a network of helpers. And we have 3 major questions based on problems. One is battery metals that were detected in sediments by Ivano's work may be taken up by life in the slough. And so our approach for testing that is to test the tissues of targeted plant and animal species and to test those for the same heavy metals that Ivano found in the sediment samples. The next potential issue is that metals may accumulate in tissues over time. So this is known from other metals such as mercury. It's also known from other contaminations with cobalt or nickel, where these can accumulate in tissues over time. And so we then have a temporal component added where we're evaluating metal concentrations in tissues collected over time for the first 18 months post-fire. Hopefully that will give us enough of a snapshot to know what's coming next. And third is that different species, modes of feeding, or lifestyles may be more or less susceptible to taking up those metals. And so as part of that, we're surveying broadly throughout the food web across several different species of plants and invertebrates and fish, including lots of different functional feeding groups like suspension feeders or predators. and including those that are eaten by top predators, such as humans, sea otters, leopard sharks, right? We have quite a few higher trophic levels in the slough as well. My presentation is going to be a not super satisfying one. These are preliminary results that I'm going to share today. And so no conclusions should be drawn from this. Our sample sizes are still small, and so things may change as we sample more. But we talk a little bit about the approach and what we do have so far. So field collections, the fire was in January. For biological sampling, the land stewards were actually already scheduled to be out doing field work in Elkhorn Slough just 2 weeks later. So our first samples were collected 2 weeks post-fire. And then we went out monthly at first and then bi-monthly after that. And we've got a few more field trips planned. And we've surveyed 4 different major sites in Elkhorn Slough: North Harbor, Hester Marsh, which you saw from Ivano's map, Whistle Stop or Shark Flats, and then Kirby Park. So these are different areas of the slough. Geographically, they're different distances from the Battery Fire site, but also they're places that have more or less tidal exchange. And so that may also influence, say, the residence time, or how long those metals may stay in their area. So I mentioned it's preliminary results that I'm going to share today, just from 2 sites highlighted now in orange. That's Kirby Park and North Harbor, from the first 3 months of sampling, January, February, and March, and from 2 taxonomic groups, the bivalves and the crustaceans. But that said, we've targeted quite a few species. So this is a list of our target species. So we've got a variety. I'm playing with animations here. So we've got a variety of different plants/algae, bivalves, such as mussels, cockles, bent-nosed clams, crustaceans, so various types of crabs and shrimp, gastropods, a bunch of snails and chitons, and then some fish. I could not figure out how to make a nice graphic of a fish, so they swim, they got vertebrae. And so mostly for monitoring, we're doing staghorn sculpin and gobies, which are tiny and not things that humans might eat, but are things that, say, a harbor seal might eat, or a lingcod or something like that. We did just recently, with the help of Scott Hamilton and with the MPSL team, we were able to get out and collect some larger, more edible fish species in the slough. So we now have, from 1 sampling point so far, California halibut, speckled sand dabs, English sole, white sea perch, and black surf perch. So that will be really nice when we can get those analyzed, because those are things that people actively go fishing for in the slough right now. Also, while we've been out sampling, just an observation, there are people out fishing and clamming in Elkhorn Slough plenty of times. So while we've been digging up clams for this, we've had people next to us digging them up saying, oh, how are you going to prepare yours? And we're like, oh, for analysis. You know, like, so it's important, I think, to get this information to know, right? Like, the Department of Public Health has interest in understanding whether there's potential for, humans to be taking up these metals as well. I will not speak about that today because we don't have enough information yet. After they are collected, there is a huge amount of processing that is involved, which is what Autumn coordinates a ton of. And so the samples are dissected and then they're composited together so that you can kind of account for the variability that might be from, say, one Battleria mud snail to the other, which, can I just say, because this is a Moss Landing group here, many of you are in marine ecology and probably lamented counting hundreds of Battleria or thousands of Battleria, but we do this every month, you guys. It's actually real science to make you do that. And then we dissect them, which is a lot. So after they're composited, there's a lot of processing and digestion that occurs that I'm sure Autumn could speak a lot more about, all of the vagaries and important details to know to be able to make sure you're getting things fully digested and quality controlled. And then they're run through an inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometer, which ICP-MS measures 12 different metals, 3 of which are those metals that Ivano detected from the sediments, which are nickel, manganese, and cobalt. Over here, this is just our compositing information. So these are the data that I'll present today. These are in a preliminary report that we've posted online. It's not peer reviewed. It's meant for transparency to let people know where we're at, because science is slow and we want information and we want to share. So here's a little bit of results to date, starting with the bay mussel, Middleus trossulus or Galloprovincialis. So there are going to be several plots like this, so I started with just one. So for the bay mussel, we've got here the cobalt, manganese, and nickel concentrations measured in January, February, and March. And so looking here for the bay mussel, we could see that in January, the concentrations seemed to be relatively higher than they were in February and March. For cobalt, it wasn't as clear for manganese. And I'm learning a lot about metals. I'm a sponge scientist. I'm a deep sea biologist. Metals behave differently in biological tissues and in biological systems. Manganese is super, super common in nature. Naturally, it shows up in photosystem 2 for any plant that does photosynthesis. So manganese levels are generally more variable, whereas nickel and cobalt tend to be more like inputs that would come from, yes, natural, but also more human sources. So manganese tends to be noisier. Okay, so starting with all the other bivalves we met. Where did they go? Ooh, okay, animations. Okay, so we see there's variation based on different species in terms of what the concentrations were. If we just take cobalt, for example, the bay mussels had elevated cobalt concentrations, whereas California mussels don't seem to have as high, right? Cockles, not as much. The couple gaper clams we were able to find, and Olympia oysters, which were definitely an interest for a lot of us because many of us have been involved in Olympia oyster restoration in the slough, did not really seem to have elevated levels of either of any of the metals. Oh, for manganese, which is the noisy one. Is there any that stands out to anyone? So bent nose clams. It turns out bent nose clams are not like the other clams here. Number one, because first, right away, we were like, oh, those concentrations are a lot higher than all the other species. But then, as it turns out, bent-nosed clams are the only clams of this group that are not filter feeders. These are deposit-feeding bivalves, and so they put palps out and they grab material, organic material from the sediments, or they'll actually ingest the sediments and sort the inorganic from the organic. So they're a very different feeding mode than the other species. We also have some results from crustaceans. So we've got green crabs, the line shore crab, the red rock crabs, the finger breakers, and the square shore crabs up here, the little ones. And so you could see here some variability. I'm sorry I didn't have them on the same plot. These actually all have lower concentrations by about half of what the bivalves do. So just comparing across species, we see that. You can see how there aren't a ton of data yet, right? So does this mean that there's metal accumulated from the battery fire? Well, it's really hard to tell without context, right? So I think this reiterates Ivano's point about the importance of monitoring ahead of time and having baseline data. One of the things that we could do with this biological data is the same as what Ivano did for the sediment data, which was to ask about the ratio of the two metals, nickel and cobalt, together, and to ask whether they became correlated following the fire, because that would suggest a common source. And so here, this is from monitoring in January, February, and March. And these M's are the slopes of those lines, right? So a 2-to-1 ratio should have a slope of 2 on here. And so you see that before the fire, there was not really any sort of tight coupling. There also wasn't a very tight correlation. But then the correlation gets tighter and does approach 2 in February and in March. And over here, this is just sort of variation of different species. So from this, too, you could see that, for example, these triangles, our crustaceans, didn't really fit on the line as tightly as, say, all of these bivalves, which tended to. So again, it kind of points to the value of our broad sampling, but also how more data are going to help us. A couple things about the ratios. In the sediments, freshly after they rained down, those were if from the battery fire, which seems consistent with the timing with when they showed up. That ratio would be very tightly from whatever burned, right? A 2-to-1 ratio. Biology is messy. And so what happens to those ratios once a clam ingests them may change over time. So I would predict, if I had to make a hypothesis, as we continue monitoring, that this slope is going to drift away and that the tightness of this correlation would go away if they don't have a new input, a battery fire metal that's constantly coming in, right? So like if there was a common source to whatever altered this ratio to become this 1.5, this is going to be the tightest correlation that we have, and then it should dissipate. Also, biological material is messy, and so different metals will fractionate differently in different tissues, and so I anticipate it'll get noisier because of that. So, okay, so what do we take away from this is that there seemed to be a common source of nickel and cobalt that altered this ratio in February, right, for these biological samples. So should we not eat mussels in the slough? I can't answer that yet, but is it outside of the range of what, say, mussels experience? So we are lucky that there is one set of monitoring data and one species that has been monitored in the past, and that is mussels, as the state and federal mussel watch programs, which MPSL did a lot of the monitoring and measurement for. And so with that, Natalie compiled all the data from before up to 2007 when they stopped recording or collecting mussels from Elkhorn Slough and measuring metal concentrations. They measured nickel and manganese, but not cobalt. So we can't look at the ratios, for example, but we can look at nickel and compare what the range of variability is of nickel concentrations in mussel tissues collected before any of this happened and then after the fire. And so from this, we see that there's the concentrations are not appreciably higher than, or they're not outside of the range of variability of what we've seen from mussels measured in the past. This, again, is for the first 3 months. Can't say anything about what may have changed since then or whether this continues. The other thing, Wes took a look at metal concentrations that were measured also from mussel watch programs and made this cumulative frequency curve, which basically says the percent of mussels that contain, say, 2 micrograms per gram of nickel was approximately 40%, 38%, right? So 38% of mussels that you might collect, and this was actually from, I think this was across California. I know this says this. Across California, this is kind of the range of what concentrations exist. So here is where the average is for our Elkhorn Slough mussel concentrations, and so what that means is, about 50% of the mussels in the state of California have concentrations higher than and lower than the mussels that were collected in Elkhorn Slough. So far from this, some context is that unlike the sediments, the metal concentrations are not crazy high from those samples in those first 3 months. That's what I can say for now. So preliminary results from the biota work suggest that there's some indication that metals from the battery fire did enter estuarine food webs, right? We see metal concentrations where the ratios of nickel and cobalt are consistent with a common source, but the concentrations are within range of what's been measured in the past so far. We're trying to find other people who have other tissue samples in their freezers from other studies, so that we have comparisons for more than just mussels. If you know anyone who's done studies in Elkhorn Slough, for example, if you're doing your thesis and you've got a cool study or a cool paper that you've read and you find out that a group was working on staghorn sculpins and they might have some extras, right? We can take a look into that. But that said, told you not too satisfying. I would not suggest any conclusions about the ecological impacts could be drawn yet or human health impacts. You can't speak to human health. We are marine scientists, but we have a lot more samples collected, a lot processed, and I'm excited. Autumn actually just sent another spreadsheet of data, and I'm like really wanting to go and stick it in R. So we'll keep sharing, and we'll keep on posting that as we get it for transparency, and then hopefully we can come out to a point where we have, a report paper that we publish as well. Okay. Ivano should be coming back soon. So,
do you want to take some questions?
I could, yeah. I can also talk a little bit about his stuff. Let's do questions, sure. Okay. Yeah, hi, Bruno.
Awesome talk, thank you. Lots of cool work. Approximately, what's like the turnaround time from getting tissue samples, like getting them out from the organisms, and then receiving the data back? Like you just said, you got the spreadsheet. How long does that kind of take? And what's that process like, if you can speak to it?
Do you want to take that one, Autumn? Yeah, I feel like you could talk a lot more about the details. Yeah, come on up. That'd be great. Hey, we're doing a couple quick questions, and then you can come back and talk. Yeah.
Okay, hi guys. So I work down at MPSL, down at the Norte facility, and we're handling all of the tissue processing So the question was, how long does it take? And the answer is longer than it should. So in a perfect world, I would get samples, I would have them dissected in a week. It would take a couple days to a week to get them digested, which is where we add acid and break it down into a liquid so that it can be run on the ICP. And then maybe another week to analyze and process the data. And those steps include all of the quality assurance that is associated. We have a lot of things that we have to do in order to prove that our data are in control. So you guys probably know all about that kind of thing, but we live and breathe it down there. So in a perfect world, it would take, 3 weeks to a month to get a final report out. In an actual world, it sometimes is a year. So EPA holding times for metals are typically 1 year. And I hate to say this, but it's only that short because they're trying to get people to get data out faster. Metals are not going to degrade in frozen samples. What will degrade is they'll get freezer burned or something like that, and so you won't be able to get a more accurate fresh weight result, which I think you're using fresh weight. Is that correct?
Sometimes
Wet
dry weight.
You're using
Usually,
dry weight?
yeah.
So the dry weight is actually more accurate, but industry standard depends on the species and the species group, what they report.
Yeah.
That answer your question? Yeah. Great.
Cool.
Do you want to take more questions, or you want to transition back?
Let's. Any more burning questions, or should we go to some more?
I have kind of a burning question.
Okay. Yes.
Can you go back to that figure that looks at the muscle data compared to the rest of the data? And it ends in 07. I'm just curious if you know anything about there was a power plant here during the 92 to 2007, and what's the metal output of that? And there were also other fires. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm saying in this data here from the SLU, it goes from 92 to 07. So there's no data that's in between the power plant, the gas power plant is taken down, because you can't really call that natural.
No, and Elkhorn Slough is not fully natural.
Yeah.
It's not a pristine slough. It's always had human input. So, I wondered about that too. I hadn't actually thought about the fallout, so we could look at what coal, because it was coal burning before. It was gas burning, or no?
It was gas.
Oh, okay, gas.
So maybe not so much.
Okay, so but we could check that. The other thing is that nickel is something that's used in some pesticides or herbicides, and so that any kind of agricultural runoff or changes in that could also potentially vary some of those numbers. Yeah.
The dates, I don't believe actually correspond to when the power plant shut down. It was a matter of funding. So the state Muscle Watch program ended somewhere in the early 2000s, and there was an endowment that paid for it that we continued to analyze samples well into later years, and that endowment unfortunately couldn't afford to do that anymore after 2007. So, and I will point out that in 96 was a huge flood here in Moss Landing, and so that might be why you have that signal in 97.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it actually speaks to the importance of long-term monitoring programs, right? That you have that gap
Definitely.
data. Do you want to?
Switch gears and continue?
Sure. I'll be brief. So apparently, I just learned today that I work for the Geological Department of San Jose State University, Geological Oceanography Department of San Jose State University. So I have my own department. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, sure. All right. So we left with the smoking guns, right? That if I remember correctly, and and again, thankful for all the instrumentation that we have here. We can really do incredible and quick science too. I mean, that's really the key. And so I'm going to show you some snapshots of the evolution of surface concentration of the three metals over time. Actually, this is before the fire, to a certain extent. I don't have enough time to, but because this is actually an extrapolation, but essentially before the fire, the concentration, actually we just talked about it, of all three metals weren't that minimal. I mean, some places were pretty high. And by the way, they all occur naturally. So there's also natural sources. In the Bay Area, nickel can be as high as 60 ppms. So it occurs in rocks. So rocks get weathered. So the watershed also is a source of... and manganese is a very fundamental component of most minerals. So finding it at thousands of ppms doesn't really worries and anybody. So this is the caveat. However, cobalt is usually either 0 or less than 30 ppms or 20 ppms. And so the color, the heat maps that you see here show the concentration of these three metals before the fire, and they're all within either 0 or less. Well, not all. They are in the upper range of the shaded color maps that you see there. So this is before, this is right after, and you can see how the ester marsh area heats up really clearly. And again, we are about a couple kilometers from here. So this is the power plant. So we are up to 2 kilometers away from the power plant, and then this is the situation after about a month, actually more than a month after the fire. So it was a pulse that settled on the surface of the marsh soil and then eventually partially dissipated. I don't know why this slide is here, because when you throw things... well, actually, no, I know why. I now remember. So, sorry, it's my brain is trying to connect it. Okay. So one of the things that we can do, coupling geochemical measurements and spatial modeling, is that we can answer questions such as how much stuff got there. Because if we know the thickness of the deposit, which actually should be a slide that should be coming first, but whatever, I'll show you that later. So we know that the deposit was only a few millimeters thick. So we can make an assumption and say, okay, let's say it was 5 millimeters thick. We know the area over which it occurred. We know the densities. So we can calculate the mass, right? And adding plus or minus errors, we did a lot of that, error propagation. So what we came up with for the ester area, so which is again, only the dashed area that you see here, which is about 300 acres. And that, just to give you a sense, it's a third of Golden Gate Park. I looked at on ChatGPT to talk to the journalist. So because if they say 300 acres, like, what is it? A third of Golden Gate Park. So we found that plus or minus a lot is about 25 metric tons of metals. Okay, so to put that in perspective, as I mentioned earlier, there were more than 35,000 batteries in the facility at the time of the fire, which equals to about 1,400 metric tons of heavy metals being present, which is a lot. So even if only 70% or 80% of the material burned, we're still talking about 1,000 metric tons of material burning. So what we found is a very, very tiny fraction, less than about 1% of what burned. And probably I did my maths randomly in my brain right now, so please check me on that. So we account only for a very small fraction of the material. Still, 25 metric tons of metals in such a small area is obviously very significant. The other slide was because, this one is my slide to show, first of all, that this is how I discovered the battery origin. Do you remember, Michael? I Googled it because I was finding those bolts. I had no idea. And that's the first thing that popped out on my screen. It was like, ooh, do you want to buy lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt oxide, toxic material for only $225.95? What is it, 500 grams? So how much money is in Ester Marsh? That's the question, right? You divide 25 tons by 500 grams. That's a ton of money right there to be made. So, but this was actually really the way I figured out what the story was. And when I saw it, I really freaked out. So the other thing that I want to share with you is this, which it's an ugly bivariate plot, obviously, but it actually makes a really important point, which has been kind of the sticking point of this whole story here, which is that the ash layer, the fallout deposit, wasn't an avalanche, was a sprinkle of dust coming off the smoke plume, which occurred over, as I said, a very thin veneer. So what we did was an exercise here in my lab. We took samples. We sliced the soils parallel to the surface, right? That's how we sample. We don't go there and we take cores, or we take a shovel and we put things in the bag, which is the standard protocol for EPA, apparently. I'll tell you in a second the story. And so what we did, we had all these little slices, so we measured them with a caliper. So, it's pretty approximate. And what we did, we measured the ratio between the field measurement, okay, what we were measuring in the field with a probe, with a surface probe, and the lab measurement. And what we found is that there is an okay correlation between thickness of the slice and the ratio between field versus lab. In other words, the thicker the sample is that is being collected, the smaller the signal that you see in the lab. Does it make sense? So that means that if you use standard protocols, and if you read the reports from EPA and other agencies that have found no metals in Alconslu or in the surrounding areas, is because their smallest shallow sample is at least 1 inch, but also seeing usually 3 to 6 inches report. So in other words, they go out there and they take a chunk of soil like this, and they put it in the bag, they shake it up, they dry it, and they extract about 1/4 gram for ICP analysis, and they find nothing. And that's what I kept telling them, you're diluting it. You just, of course you're not going to find nothing. It's like, powdered sugar on a cake. If you want to find the powdered sugar, you don't measure the whole cake. You measure the surface of it. I made that example. Is it clear? No. It just didn't go. And the paper shows how the sampling is actually key to actually detect those metals. So you have to adapt. Protocols are not made just to follow them. They are made for specific reasons. So as scientists, we have the benefit that we can adapt to the situation. Okay, so I'll show you a couple more things, and then I'm here for any questions. So this is another figure that made it to the paper, which shows the concentration of nickel, which is our favorite of the 3 metals because it's more conservative, it's easy to measure for many other reasons. And you can clearly see so this is before fire, and this is right after the fire. And there are 2 things that are really obvious. One is, it jumped thousands of ppms, that's pretty obvious. Also the scatter, you see? And that's another key element. What we learned doing the field analysis is that the fallout is not a homogeneous carpet. So if you sample here versus here, literally, those are the distances, you might find significant difference. So that, again, supports the idea that if you are in a government agency, you cannot take one sample here, drive 20 miles, take another sample, and really think they're going to get a picture of what's happening. And so that's what's happened. Their N was like 4, and one sample was taken here, the other sample was taken 10 miles away. And again, what we show here is that it's very patchy, and things moved through time because wind and stuff and we're moving them around. And the other thing that it shows, the blue curve is cumulative precipitation, is that once the rain kicked in, the runoff probably took care of much of the material that was at the surface. And also the tides, but the runoff, luckily we had pretty intense precipitation. I don't know if luckily is the right word, because it went somewhere else. It didn't disappear, but it went somewhere else. So, and then you see how and I have an update, actually. My student stating it's collecting more samples, and now we have information up to November, but I didn't have time to plot them, so it's only until October. But you see that by February, much of the surface concentration went closer to baseline levels, although in some places they're still pretty high. And those are the places which are more undrained, the one that, like the salt pans, that's where you still find a lot of high concentration of metals. So you still can see them just go inside the mud flats and those little isolated salt pans. So this is the plot that I put together yesterday, and with not the latest, but close to the latest data. So now it goes all the way to the fall. This is for nickel again. And the way you see this, those are coupled measurements. By the way, one of the key to our measurement was to measure the surface and then peel off the surface and then measure the subsurface. So all measurements are paired. So we have like a background and the surface measurement. So that's what you see here. Before the fire, after the fire, look at the surface, just jumped up. And then this is post-rain, after the rain. So, it went back down somewhat. There are still places, as I said, they're still pretty high. And then this is in May, still pretty high. And this is actually in the fall. And you see the level really almost back to baseline. Almost. It's significantly different still, though. So we're not back to baseline yet, but it's definitely getting there. So, you know, one of the things that is obvious also about this is that if you weren't here a few days after, we wouldn't see this. You have to be there right away. We would have missed the whole story. So finally, I want to show you this other box plot here. You know whisker plots, I don't have to tell you what they mean in terms of median and percentiles. But this is actually a really cool one because it shows the ratio between nickel and cobalt. So now if you remember, the fingerprint of the battery is 2. So nickel is twice as much as cobalt. And again, surface versus deep. So before the fire, the subsurface samples actually had statistically higher concentration of cobalt relatively to nickel. After the fire, it flipped, and you can clearly see the battery signature there, the 2-to-1 signature. And then slowly, over time, the subsurface kind of stayed the same. Actually, it's significantly not different at all. But eventually, the surface started decreasing, and to almost baseline level. However, the subsurface is picking up the battery. Well, it's picking up something. Recently has been changing, and it's significantly different. I don't know if you can see that. So, question number one, why was it like this, and now is actually like this? And so, what we know about those two metals is that they have very different behavior in relation to the different redox boundaries, whereby cobalt tend to precipitate more. So the metals are, those metal beads are shedding stuff as they interact with the environment. And the cobalt tends to be more likely incorporated into iron oxide and hydroxide. So above the redox boundary. As this stuff moves through the sediment column slowly, maybe 1 millimeter amount, then eventually they find themselves below the redox boundary. So now we have the opposite, where cobalt becomes more soluble, and nickel tend to be incorporated more into carbonates, sulfides. So we think that's what's happening, is that the metals are progressing through the redox boundary. So we're going to test that, because obviously when something becomes soluble, it becomes more bioavailable. And I do have also one plot from Max that I want to show you in a second. So this is our conceptual model that we're working on. We applied for 2 grants. We'll see if we got any money to do that. But essentially, we are predicting the behavior of the two metals in relation to the depth of the redox zones, whereby the closer you are to the center of the marsh, the shallower the redox zone is, and diffusion dominates, as opposed to the two edges, either the hillside or the levees of a channel, where you have more aeration, either tidal pumping or groundwater, so you have a deeper redox boundary there. So we're going to be measuring actually this redox boundary. 2 of our students are going to do that in the next few days. And then we're going to test whether we see speciation changing in relation to the redox boundary. So we're learning, we're going to learn a lot about how metals behave in those different environments. So finally, I'm going to show you, I have a slide about Amber, but you talked about Amber. So this is Max Brand, in case you don't know him. He's a great guy. We're very lucky. This is the best faculty ever. Actually, smart people are here, thankfully, because I'm not one of them. And Max is one of them. And so him and his crew, they've been going out there every month collecting water samples over a tidal cycle. They go out there with a really clean, super clean things because of trace metals. I'm so glad I don't work with trace metals. It's a pain. And so what they do, they go after the peak tide, right? So they get the cleanest water possible coming from the bay, and then they keep sampling every hour as the ebb tide continues on. So they try to get the signal coming from the upper part of the slough. And so what they see is, well, they didn't see anything major yet, by the way, because many samples are still frozen again. We need to find money, time, patience to go through all this stuff. But what they found is that actually you had class data, talking about the importance of baseline data, but also classes, because there are a lot of cool stuff we do with classes that turned out to be really important, such as they had the crews before the battery fire, and the two metals, you see, they were coming on a ratio of 9 to 1, so nickel was 9 times higher than cobalt. And now, in the most recent cruises, they found that the ratio actually decreases. So there's more cobalt being shed to the water, which is consistent with this idea that cobalt, as I showed you earlier, cobalt is being dissolved as it goes through the redox zone. So maybe there's a picture coming together. I mean, those are really preliminary data, but we're also working on that aspect. And there's also stormwater data that we still need to work on, because there's a lot of good information there. So we have a ton of data. But that's, and with Max and our students, we're going to do pore water profiles. So our idea is to test this by coupling coring, solid phase metals, and pore water together. So we'll figure that out. So I think that's pretty much what, yeah, right? Yeah. So and we have time for questions. You have a question?
I have a comment.
We talk all the time. Oh, you have a comment. Oh.
Microphone. That was cool that you said that about the cobalt dissolving into the pore water, because cobalt is also taken up more by roots of plants than shoots.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
another way that if it does get loosened up in pore water, then it could be taken up by pickleweed or
Yeah, exactly.
eelgrass. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also plant data, which is also fascinating.
Yeah.
There's another data. There are more data sets out there. There's one on plants, which is really scary, I must say. Because obviously, one thing that you should think about, don't go away.
No, I was going to run the microphone for you.
Oh, yeah. The thing that you should think about is this. This is the caveat of all this. All our measurements are on bare soils. So we're missing, the big picture is plants all over the place. So that's where the stuff really fell on, like umbrella. So we're totally skipping that part. And when we start measuring plants, we freaked out. So I stopped. I was like, okay, I can't handle this. No, seriously, you remember, Michael, when we talked about this, we were finding like, it makes sense. I mean, also they're rough. So we found those,
Like the hairs on the leaves.
yeah, the
right?
bristle to whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they really capture really well. And after the rain, they were still there. So there's a whole story about plants, and plants, the things we eat are also plants. And, it happens there are agricultural fields all around, and I'll just leave it there for your worst nightmares. Questions? And then I talk with you.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, Ivano, so you mentioned the 25 metric tons of material in that 300-acre area, and then obviously your concentrations went down by a significant factor between January and February. Do you know how much that lowers the mass of material that was still in that 300 acres, rough estimate? And also, do you know anything about whether, when the rain happened, whether that ran it off the surface into the slough, or whether it caused it to percolate down through the soil? And apologies for naive questions.
No. I don't know the answer to the first question. We didn't calculate that. This is something, thank you for reminding me I need to calculate that. No, we didn't do that. I didn't have time. Yeah, we can totally do that. It's really easy actually at this point. Yeah, it's a ratio, so I just need to do that. Thank you. Yeah, and then the runoff, where the runoff. Yeah, well, that's why Max was out there measuring the water out there, and we do have cores too that were collected right off Elster, and we did find in one core there was a spike in metals, but just in one core.
So likely that a lot of it just ran off the surface into the slough.
Yeah, into the main channel, and maybe during one of the tidal cycle got flushed out in the ocean. Yeah, but also percolation is another potential avenue for the metals to move. Yeah.
I was curious if you did any sampling for microbial communities in the soil or water. I'm just curious because I know some microbial communities could be impacted by heavy metal contamination, and I know that there's some bacteria that are known to be able to degrade them.
Yeah, so we do have Sarah as a student. Sarah, as if I don't know her and I've never seen her in my life. Nice to meet you. Sarah, as a student, I happen to be you, whose project is actually going to be, do you want to talk about it a little bit? No. But the answer is yes. So just briefly, you submitted also a proposal, right?
Yeah, so that's actually what I'm going to be looking at, just because microbes many of them do have this unique ability to tolerate heavy metals, and in doing so, are processing them in a way that's making them less bioavailable in the system. So that'll be beginning shortly. But yes, that's one of the big questions, is if we can also potentially find really good remediators, either condition them or look into some like bioengineering, and then if we were able to like enhance that community, if there would be a faster processing of some of these metals and sequestration in the future as a remediation.
Thank you, Rania. Yeah. And also, I mean, the solution is to get them into a stable form. So, for instance, if you have precipitation sulfides like pyrite, then it's going to be forever. So I'm wondering about microbes just cycling things through, right? Or degassing. I mean, that would be the other thing, just to transform them into a gaseous form rather than, because otherwise you just get into like a food chain kind of thing, right?
I think the idea is that you have them under this, like sedimentation is going to occur.
It's a debate between me and Rania.
Well, you'll hear more about this on whatever the
paper,
10th
the
or whatever,
class
the
paper.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, but I think the idea is more that if these microbes are underneath more this like anoxic layer, that then there's more sedimentation over it, and it just becomes a part of the sedimentation record.
Like
but it's
burial
just not,
carbon, basically, you just sequester them.
So of course, then if that area were ever in the future dredged, you'd have the same problem. This is true, but it is a solution.
Temporary solution. Okay.
Temporary solution,
Like everything
possibly
else.
more permanent.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm looking forward to reading your class paper. All right.
More questions?
Hi. I'm curious, when the metals settle, how likely are they to be re-picked up by wind or redistributed? Are they not being picked up because they're being wet by tides? Just how likely is that?
Yeah, actually, this is a really good question, because this is something that we were wondering right after the fire. There's a clear, okay, so we ran a very basic statistics here, and we found that there's a correlation between elevation and concentration of metals. Meaning, the deeper you go, the lower you go, the more metals you find. It's clear. And so we were wondering what that was due to. And so there are kind of two hypotheses, which we didn't discuss in the paper, because one is that especially people working with fire know that the smoke plume dynamics is very complex. It's not a simple 2D model in which the plume just goes away and then eventually stuff settles, especially when you're talking about airborne particulate. So there's a lot of convective cells forming, and they might actually preferentially deliver material into low-lying areas. So that's one hypothesis. The other one is that they were wet, because actually there was a pretty high tide just before the fire, so things stick better on wet stuff. So, no, actually, I don't know why I'm looking at you. You asked the question. So I'm at the end of my road. So yeah, so sticky soil, actually we talked about that, remember. The sticky soil might be more conducive to actually capture the stuff, while the rest might actually be captured by low winds, exactly as you said. So but it was very much speculation. It would be really cool to couple some modeling with what we found in the field, and actually use even the larger data set that the folks at whatever it's called, the Never Again Most Landing folks did, which is a much larger survey over a much larger area, using a different approach, but they have data from the whole Monterey Bay. It would be really cool to couple some modeling of the smoke plume with that, and see whether there's any association also with the preconditioning, the type of soil, where the different types of soil actually have a different behavior in that sense. But that's really, we talked a lot about that. And cool question. All right. No more questions? Okay. Well, thank you for putting up with our crazy schedule. Thank you, Amanda, as I said, and Max and Sarah and Autumn and Wes and everybody here is just again, we're super lucky. I'm very thankful to my colleague, and I don't know that guy. Steven? Steven. Yeah. Oh, that's right. And Steven, and of course, and all the students. I mean, this is really a unique place. This is an example of how we're ready to for action, and thanks to the instrumentation, the facility, the boating, and all that. So that was very important. And now let's get some money to keep going here. That's the hardest part.
It's so much better to propose your research before you do it. We had it figured out as we went. It's great to plan ahead. That's my advice for students. But sometimes, right, I think what's cool about this was we used our, I forgot about that, sorry. What's cool about this was, we used our expertise. We thought about how we could contribute because, whenever there's something that happens, you don't want it to happen necessarily, but you want to know how you could be a helper in the situation. So we figured out ways to do the monitoring, came together.
The solution is to first apply for funding, then burn the battery, the batteries for the facility, and then it's like, throwing the stone to the glass, right? You're right. It's like, I got a project here.
But truly, that is probably one of the values that will come from this is that next time that there is an event, there can be a monitoring strategy ready to go. There's the value and importance of baseline data. And my mom made this connection. The LA wildfires had a lot of burning electric vehicles. Each one was a small lithium battery fire. And so understanding this larger scale event can help to understand those smaller scale events as well that might be happening. So, yeah, it's good. Funding would be nice.